in the room? No? Okay, she's missing an item, so if you see her.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorna Hainesworth, and today I'd like to tell you about a survey that Meriwether Lewis did at Cumberland Gap. However, before I tell you about that, I need to tell you how that came about. The 3630 line of North Latitude is a very popular line for creating state boundaries. Here we see it beginning at the Atlantic Ocean and continuing across the country, dividing Virginia from North Carolina, separating Kentucky from Tennessee, divides Missouri from Arkansas. It separates the Texas Panhandle from the Oklahoma Panhandle. It runs parallel underneath the southern boundary of Kansas, Colorado, and Utah, and then makes its way to the Pacific Ocean by way of Ocean Avenue going through Carmel by the sea. Now, basically, when you look at this line, it looks fairly consistent, but that's not really true, because when you take a closer look, you're going to start to see certain anomalies. Here what we are seeing is we're seeing that same line from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. We're going to take a close look at certain portions of that line. First of all, we're going to take a look at a segment of the line that is some 60 miles west of the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 20 miles west of the Great Dismal Swamp, which is right here. And this has been referred to in some articles as the tiny turn. Basically, the line is going west, and then when it gets to the Blackwater River, it drops south about half a mile and then continues west. Evidently, the surveyors who were given instructions to survey this line were told that if following the natural terrain made it easier, they could do so. So they followed the Blackwater River for about half a mile. When we look in the vicinity right here, this puts us in the area of the Cherokee National Forest. And we're going to see an offset at that location. We can see that the line is coming in, headed west, and then it jogs up about 2.5 miles, continues west for about 15 miles, and then drops down and continues west again. There were 2 teams of surveyors in this area. And what happened was they had a disagreement as to where the line should be. And this seems to be the result of the fact that they couldn't agree on where the line was supposed to be placed. When we look at the area that is the Cumberland Gap, again we're going to see a jog in the line. The line is coming in, it drops down about 1.5 miles to sort of follow the gap itself, and then continues west. Over here, we're looking at the line when where I-65 crosses the border between Tennessee and Kentucky. What we've got there is an offset within an offset. This is called the Simpson-Middleton offset. Now, you'll hear apocryphal stories about how the surveyors were drunk and they had this keg of whiskey. Well, that's not true. What happened was that these are the days when they had to do surveying by using compass and chain, and they had to take astronomical observations by looking up at the stars. Well, when they got to this area, they had fog for several days. You can't see very many stars in the fog. The reason that the line goes like that is because they thought they were right, but when they finally got down here and the fog cleared, they corrected themselves. This little jog you see here is called the Middleton offset. When the surveyors were coming through, Mr. Middleton said, I don't really care where you put the line, except that my 100 acres has always been in Tennessee. So they made an exception for him. So that's all we can Now, let's take a look at this anomaly. Here we are at the land between the lakes. This is the Cumberland River coming down here. This is the Tennessee River going down here. The line comes in, goes up a couple of miles, and crosses over the land between the lakes. Then it drops 12 miles before continuing west again. The last anomaly that I'm going to show you is called the Tennessee exclave. There is a portion, the Kentucky exclave. There is a portion of Kentucky, all the white that you see here is Kentucky. There's a portion of Kentucky that is not attached to Kentucky.
No.
You cannot get there from Kentucky. You have to go to Missouri or Tennessee to get to that portion of Kentucky. It is called the Kentucky exclave. All right.
Oh, here, okay.
You've seen the line, and so what we're going to do is we're going to look this afternoon at how that line came to be. It'll be the dividing line between Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The line was surveyed through the course of 4 different surveys. Those surveys began after Virginia was made into a colony. Virginia had a charter of 1609. There were several charters that the Virginia Company of London had. The 1609 one is the one in which one of the commissioners said that in the beginning, all America was Virginia. And the reason he said that is because in the second charter, which was 1609, it said that Virginia was to start at Point Comfort and then go 200 miles south, which takes you about to the 34th parallel, and then go from there in a line west to from sea to sea. Now, you know, they didn't know really what was out there. They just figured, well, if there's an ocean here, there's probably an ocean over there, so they said sea to sea. They also said that it would go 200 miles north of Point Comfort, which takes you to about the 40th line of latitude, and then to go northwest, sea to sea. So this whole area at that time was Virginia. Now, this is the guy that changes all of that. He is Charles II. He is restored, the monarchy is restored to the throne of England in 1660. This guy's father, Charles I, was accused of treason and was executed. That's what gave rise to Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell then became, they had a commonwealth or republic or whatever, but after Cromwell died, they decided to restore the monarchy. So they put Charles II on the throne. Now, Charles II was known as the merry monarch. He had a very lively, hedonistic kind of court. It also might be due to the fact that, yeah, he had a wife, but they didn't have any kids. He fathered, I don't know, 12 to 14 illegitimate kids with like 5 to 7 different mistresses, so maybe that's why he was called the merry monarch. In any event, he decides to create the colony of Carolina. I think, this is just my speculation, I think what he has in mind is to give this land, which he does, to his 8 lords proprietors. I think he's trying to establish, you know, a power base or a collection of guys that will come to his aid in the event that his fate seems to be headed in the same direction as his father's. Well, in any event, in 1665, he decides that the dividing line between Virginia and Carolina should be on the 36 degree, 30 minutes north latitude. he says that the line should run from the north end of the Currituck Inlet and go straight west to the South Sea. Of course, we think of that today as the Pacific Ocean. I believe that this is what Charles II had in mind. He had in mind that a line would go straight across and that it would be exactly on the 3630 North Latitude line. Well, now that there's been a decision made as to where the dividing line between Virginia and Carolina should be, the governors, the colonial governors of those two colonies want to be able to establish that line so that they know where their colonies begin and end. So what they do is they petition the Privy Council, the Lords Proprietor, and this fellow right here who happens to be George I. And they say, we need to know where to start the survey. So give us a point of beginning and we'll get the survey between our two colonies established, the dividing line. Well, George I takes a look at that same charter that I showed you a little while ago, which was in 1809, and he says, well, according to the second charter of the Virginia Company, the beginning point is supposed to be at, Point Comfort, so that's where it should start. However, when the instructions are issued to the surveyors, they are told that they should start due west of Currituck. If they had started where George I wanted them to start, they would have been on the 37th line of latitude. Instead, because of their instructions, they start at Currituck, and it lands up being at the 3630 North Latitude, which is what Charles II wanted in the first place. So, we're now ready to do the first survey. And the first survey happens in 1728. The person most associated with this survey is a fellow by the name of William Byrd II of Westover. He is very rich, very well educated, a very important man. He is, as a matter of fact, he's the guy that founded Richmond, Virginia. So, a couple other things I could tell you about him. He was a pretty licentious sort of guy. As a matter of fact, his diaries are online, so if you want some risque reading, you can read his diaries. Anyway, and the reason why he's most associated, his name comes up the most regarding this survey, is because he wrote a book about the survey, and this book is titled The History of the Dividing Line Betwixt Virginia and North Carolina. And this book also is online, so you can read that if you choose to. In addition to that, he wrote another book, and that book is called The Secret History. And in that secret history, he doesn't name the names of the guys that are surveying with him. No. He gives them nicknames. He calls them Firebrand, Honest Astrolabe, Plausible, Means Well. He's poking fun at his fellow surveyors. He calls himself Steady. In any event, they do a survey. They go from the north end of Currituck Inlet, and they go all the way in a straight line, or at least they think it's a straight line, 241 miles until they get to Peters Creek. So now the line has been surveyed from the Atlantic Ocean to Peters Creek. Now, I was able to find the location of the map that William Byrd made as a result of this survey. This map, the original of it, is in the National Archives in Great Britain, which is located in Kew, England. This is what the map looks like, and what I'm going to do now is divide it up into quarters and show you a few of the features that are on each segment. The first quarter we're going to look at here is the upper right-hand corner, and that looks like this. So what you're seeing here, this is the Atlantic Ocean. This is the line that they are surveying. You see it comes along here, goes through the Dismal Swamp, and lands up over here. Remember I told you about the tiny turn? Well, he's the one responsible for that. His guys are going along, they get to the Blackwater River, boop, drop down half a mile, and keep on going. The next segment we're going to look at doesn't really show us a whole heck of a lot. It shows a little bit of the Meherrin River, and that's all you really see, but the line is continuing here. Now we get to the third segment. Here again, we're seeing the Meherrin River. The dotted line is going along, and we're seeing here is the Roanoke River. The line continues, and in the fourth segment, we see more of the Roanoke River, and we see some of the Dan River. We see the Fitzwilliam River. On this map, he also includes a description of what prompted the map, when it was done, who approved it, and it is signed by all the people who participated in this survey. So you've got a guy named Fitzwilliam, you've got another man by the name of Mayo, you've got one by the name of Irvine, and of course Byrd also signs his name to this survey. So there we've got the first map of the dividing line between North Carolina and Virginia. So let's take a look at the second survey. You see, after the first survey was done, albeit it was 241 miles, people kept moving west. And so they had to continue to survey the dividing line between North Carolina and Virginia because they had to keep up with the movement in the population, or actually be ahead of it. So the next survey is done in 1749. And this is conducted by a couple of guys you may have heard of before, Joshua Fry and Peter Jefferson. Joshua Fry was a mathematics professor at William and Mary. He was also George Washington's commander at the time of the right after the Jumonville incident. Then the Virginia regiment went west to try to get rid of the French, and he was George Washington's commander. The other fellow that we're talking about here is Peter Jefferson. Of course, he was Thomas Jefferson's father. He died, I believe, when Thomas was only 13. They are representing Virginia. We've got a couple of guys that are representing North Carolina. And what they do is together they survey the line from Peters Creek to Steep Rock Creek, which adds another 88 miles to the survey. After they finish the survey, Fry and Jefferson get together and create a map of the survey that they've conducted. That map is 6 1/4 feet long and about 1 foot high. So I've seen it, I've physically had my hands on it. When you unroll that bugger, it just goes on a big long table and it's about that high. The map itself is kept in the Special Collections Library at the Albert and Shirley Small Library at the University of Virginia. And what they say on their map, they have a note on the map that says that it is the survey from Peters Creek to Steep Rock Creek, and it was done in the fall of 1749. But what they do also is they incorporate Byrd's map into their map. And this is what that map looks like. So again, we'll take a look at it in quarters. The first segment is right here. We'll take a look at that. This, you can see, is a replica of what Byrd did. Here you've got the Atlantic Ocean. The line is going along, goes through the Dismal Swamp, comes to the tiny turn, keeps on going. And this is what they're talking about up here. They actually mention the names of the guys that did the Byrd survey, and they give them credit for this part of the map. So here we've got the Meherrin River, and now we're coming to the Roanoke River right here. The line is continuing right along here. The next segment we get to, more of the Roanoke River and some of the Dan River down here. But what you're starting to see over here, folks, is some mountains. And that's because we are now getting into the Cherokee National Forest, what is today the Cherokee National Forest. And you can see all these mountains here. And there's identification here of the New River. So this continues along until they get to Steep Rock Creek. The third survey. This was not done until 30 years later. The people that are doing this survey are Thomas Walker and Daniel Smith, they're for Virginia, Richard Henderson, and William Smith for North Carolina. Now, Thomas Walker was a land speculator. In 1749, he was sent by the Loyal Land Company to go look at the land that is on the other side of the Allegheny Mountains, or the Appalachian Mountains. And he is the first white man to see the Cumberland Gap. So he's given credit for discovering the Cumberland Gap. Clearly, the Indians had been using that as a means to get through the mountains, the Cumberland Mountains, for years and years and years. But he's the first white man to see it. When they go to do this survey, they run into all kinds of problems. The first problem they have is that they can't figure out where they should start it because they cannot find where Fry and Jefferson ended theirs. See, back in those days, what they would do is they would get maybe a wooden post, put that in the ground. Well, after 30 years, maybe it's rotted away. Or they'd put slashes on a tree. Trees get struck by lightning. Trees rot and fall down. Brush and briars can grow up around it, so you can't, the tree can heal itself over so you can't see the site. At any rate, they were having difficulty. They finally agree on what the starting point is, but then they can't agree on the placement of the line. So what they do is they survey together for about 45 miles, and then the North Carolina guys say, we are definitely wrong. We should not be here. We should be 2 miles farther north. Walker says, no, 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 we're in the right place. Well, so the North Carolina guys and the Virginia guys survey parallel to each other about 2 miles apart until they get to the Cumberland Gap. When they get there, the North Carolina guys say basically they've had enough of this foolishness. They write a letter of disagreement, and they leave in protest. However, Thomas Walker and Daniel Smith continue to survey, although this is not part of their instructions. They continue to survey until they get to the Tennessee River. Now, they don't survey absolutely every foot of that distance. They leave some fairly substantial gaps. One of the gaps that they didn't survey is something like 109 miles long. The whole distance that they would have surveyed from Steep Rock Creek to the Tennessee River would be a total of 350 miles. So Walker continues to survey, and lo and behold, when he gets to the Tennessee River, unbeknownst to him, he's not at the 3630, he's at the 3640. That's a difference of 12 miles. He is too far north, but he doesn't know that. We have a map that Walker and Smith did. This map is in the Virginia Archives at the Library of Virginia in Richmond. And this is what the map looks like. Now, I got to tell you the truth. This map was lost for at least 2 decades. And when it was found, I don't think all of its parts were found. You'll see how abruptly it ends over here. I believe what we've got here is maybe 50 or 60 miles of that 350 miles. But we'll take a look at each segment anyway. The first section looks like this. And what you're seeing here, see the Steep Rock Creek is a tributary of the Holston River. So what you're seeing here is the Holston River. And this little dotted line here is the line that they are surveying. The second segment that you see shows the dotted line going along here. It shows the Green River down here, and it shows the Cumberland River going zigzaggy all over the place. That's the way the Cumberland River is. It goes like that all through Kentucky, meanders all over the place. But at any rate, we've got this dotted line. This is what they are surveying. Now, when we come to the third segment, it says right here on the line that they're surveying, latitude 3630 north. So he believes that he is on the right line. And when we get to the fourth segment, like I'm saying, this ends very abruptly, so I have a suspicion that we don't have the entire map here. But we've got what we've got, and I don't know if the rest of it will ever be found. When Walker was doing his survey, he was coming along here. So when he got to the Cumberland River, he then went up a couple of miles and went across the land between the lakes. When he got to this point, he was already 9 miles too far north. When he got across the land between the lakes and got to the Tennessee River, he is now 12 miles. This is the line, this is the 3630 down here. This is where he should be. What I'd like to do now is take a little time to review how things were at the time the Constitution was ratified. This is basically the way Virginia looked when it ratified the Constitution in 1788. Of course, Virginia thought it owned all this up here as well. North Carolina ratified the Constitution in 1789, and this is what it looked like. Then there was this compromise that the states would cede their western lands to the federal government, and that happened in the early 1790s. So the western lands got ceded, and what that allowed for is that now we could have the creation of the state of Kentucky, which happened in 1792, and subsequently we had the creation of the state of Tennessee, which was in 1796. Now, the line between these four states is supposed to have been all the way on the 3630. But we know that when Walker got done with his survey, he was at the 3640. So what you've got is a line that should look like this, but it doesn't. We have got a line that is way up here. This is commonly referred to as Walker's line. This is the line that it should be on. That results in something that is considered to be a no man's land. You've got Walker's line here, you've got the 3630 down here. That creates all kinds of problems. You have got something in the neighborhood of 2,500 square miles that are in question. I call it a no man's land because of the problems it results in. First of all, is your property in Kentucky or is your property in Tennessee? When it's time to go serve in the militia, which one do you go to? When somebody tries to enforce the laws, you say to them, oh, you're from Kentucky? Well, I live in Tennessee, I don't have to obey your laws. Or vice versa. When it comes to legislative representation, where do you live? How do you get counted in terms of your representatives? And of course, the very most important issue here, who gets to collect the taxes? So in any event, what they did is years go by. People gradually begin to realize that the Walker line is not where it's supposed to be. And so they say, well, maybe we should resurvey it, but they don't quite get around to doing that. Well, maybe we should have some legislation. Well, they don't quite get around to doing that. Things go on back and forth, back and forth. People are arguing and fussing with each other, and it goes on for a long period of time. And into this mess steps Meriwether Lewis in the fall of 1806. He's coming home. He's been on an expedition, and he is returning back to his home in Albemarle County, Virginia. The Lewis and Clark expedition returned from a transcontinental journey. They had been gone so long that everybody thought they were dead. So when they show up in St. Louis, people are just absolutely astounded. They treat them like they're rock stars. They give them all kinds of publicity in the newspapers. People write letters. Guess what happened? Lewis and Clark came back. They're not dead after all. There are balls and dinners given in their honor. I mean, it is a big party time. In addition to that, they're traveling with about 20 people. They have got men, women, children, Mandan Indians, Osage Indians, Indian agents, Indian interpreters, members of the Corps, Clark's personal servant or slave. York is with them. They are pretty hard to miss. Now, the way they come back is they come back through what will become the states of Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. They arrive in St. Louis on the 23rd of September, 1806. And the blue line that you see here shows their route of travel. So the next place they get to after going through Vincennes and traveling along the Bison Trace is they get to Louisville. Now in Louisville, Clark has relatives. His brother George Rogers lives there. His sister Lucy lives there. There's a place called Locust Grove where she lives. And the thing is that Clark wants to spend some time with his relatives. So Lewis goes on with everybody else, but Clark stays with his relatives. When they get to Frankfurt, Pierre Chouteau leaves with the Osage. He is their agent, and he takes them to Washington, D.C. by way of the Ohio River. Lewis, on the other hand, continues on and goes, he's headed back home, he goes through the Cumberland Gap. And he gets there on November 20th of 1806. Now, when he's about to leave the area, he is asked to conduct a survey. The reason that they want him to do this survey is because they want him to settle the question of whether or not Walker's line is in the right place. He's asked to do this for a lot of really good reasons. First of all, by this time, he's famous. He's intelligent. He's an experienced explorer. He was handpicked by Jefferson to conduct this expedition. And additionally, he was trained by some of the best minds that our country had to offer at the time. Before he went on this expedition, he was trained to do mathematics and celestial observation and surveying. One of his teachers was Andrew Ellicott, whom I consider to be America's premier surveyor. He was also taught by a guy named Robert Patterson, who was a mathematics professor at the University of Pennsylvania. So, given his importance and his intelligence and his capabilities, his opinion would carry great weight. So he's asked to take a look at this line. So he does. He conducts a survey to see whether or not Walker's line is in the right place, and then he prepares a certificate that contains his findings. This is what that certificate looks like. This is less than a page long, but it is chock full of information. What we're going to do is take a look at what that survey contains. First of all, he gives us the place and the date. He said it is at Wallings on November 23rd of 1806. He talks about the request that was made for the survey. He says in compliance with the request of certain gentlemen. Then he gives the reason for the survey. He said he is to settle the latitude of the line that is usually labeled as Walker's line between Virginia and North Carolina. He tells us where he is when he does the survey. He says that he is about 200 yards south of Walker's line, and he is about 2 miles east, it's east because he's headed in an easterly direction, east of Cumberland Gap. He says he's on the property of Mr. Walling, Elisha Walling. He also talks about the instruments that he uses. He says he uses a sextant, a reversing telescope, a micrometer, an artificial horizon. Now, many of you may have already been to Cumberland Gap, and if you haven't been there, I certainly recommend it. It's, one of the places where you can actually stand with your foot, and your foot doesn't have to be all that big, in 3 states at one time. Now, when we got wind of this survey that Lewis did at Cumberland Gap, there was a bunch of us goofy people that said, well, geez, maybe we can figure out, based on the data we have, exactly where he stood when he did this survey. So we went tramping around. This is the map that the National Park Service gives you for Cumberland Gap. And so we went, here's the gap itself. This is US 58 going through here. And based on everything that we could dig up, where Wallings was, where his spring was, where his cabin was, we said, okay, based on what Lewis tells us, we think Lewis was like right about here where you see this red star. Well, that's private property. So there's no point in putting some kind of a marker there because the public can't go to see it. So what we did instead is over here, this is a parking lot. And so we put an interpretive sign in that parking lot, and it is labeled settling an old dispute. And then in addition to that, we put in what is called a surveyor's monument. And this marks the fact that Lewis and Clark, that the Cumberland Gap is part of the eastern legacy of Lewis and Clark, and this marks the vicinity in which Lewis did his survey. Bet you thought we were done with the certificate, but we're not. He goes on and talks about the methods that he used, and then he gives us his findings. He says that according to the place of observation, where he's standing is 36 degrees 38 minutes, 12 seconds. The conclusion he draws from that is that if Walker's line is supposed to be on the 3630, then Walker is some 9 miles, 1,077 yards too far north. Lewis is right. Walker is too far north. However, modern instruments tell us that he's about 7 miles too far north, not 9. So what does he do with this certificate? Well, he gives it to this guy named Arthur Campbell, Colonel Arthur Campbell. And Campbell, he says, can do with it whatever he chooses. And then he signs his name to the certificate. And I bet you all of you are saying, well, who is Arthur Campbell? Well, Arthur Campbell is one of those guys, like a mover and a shaker. He's a frontier statesman. He's somebody who's got his fingers in lots and lots of pies. He served in the French and Indian War. He served in the Revolutionary War. He was very much in favor of having the 14th state be the state of Franklin, which would basically have been the eastern part of what is today Tennessee and the western part of what is today North Carolina. He is a man who is into everything. And, well, you can already tell anybody who's got this many historical markers must be an important fellow. So what does Campbell do with Lewis's certificate? Well, for about 3 years, more than 3 years, he makes copies of the certificate and he sends them out to various different officials, government-type guys. He sends letters in which he describes what Lewis discovered or confirmed, if you will. He shows the original certificate to a number of different people who traveled through the area. These are officials of one sort or another. I mean, these are people like geographers and governors and stuff like that he's showing this to. He eventually sends the original to Christopher Greenup, who is the governor of Kentucky. And you say to yourself, well, you know, what is he trying to do? Well, I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to get Kentucky to get busy and realize that if they've got about a strip of land about 10 miles wide, that if they don't get on the stick and claim for themselves, Tennessee is going to take it when it rightfully should belong to Kentucky. Well, nothing happens. And now we come to the fourth survey, and that happens in 1818 to 1819. This survey is conducted by a guy named Luke Munsell and a fellow named Robert Alexander. They are representing Kentucky. There are no representatives for Tennessee because they didn't send any. They were supposed to, but they didn't. Instead of picking up where Walker finished, they go to the Mississippi and start there. They go to the east bank of the Mississippi River. They determine where 3630 is, and they survey west to east. Their survey was prompted by something called the Jackson Purchase. Now, what happened here is that when Kentucky, which you see up here, and when Tennessee became states, this land over here was part of the state, but could not be settled because it was Chickasaw hunting grounds. So a guy named Andrew Jackson and another fellow named Isaac Shelby. Andrew Jackson, you know, is the hero of New Orleans and that sort of thing. Isaac Shelby was a two-time governor of Kentucky. They got together and negotiated with the Chickasaw to have them extinguish their right to that land. And so when they finally do, that means it's open to settlement, but they've got to survey it. They've got to finish this line right here before they can actually open it up to settlement. So Munsell and Alexander do a survey. They did not, as near as I can determine, make a map of their particular survey. But what I'm going to show you here is a map that Luke Munsell did. This is his map of Kentucky. And there's a section down here that I want you to see. This is the Cumberland River. This is the Tennessee River. And he is saying this is the chartered line, North Latitude 3630. He's saying this is the line that is supposed to be the boundary, that this is done as a result of surveying. He talks about this land up here being land that was recently, the rights, Indian rights were extinguished recently. And so what you've got is you've got Alexander and Munsell starting over here at the Mississippi River and surveying west to east. Now, you'll notice that as they're going along, there's this big gap here. This is the land that should belong to Kentucky. This is the 3630 that you're seeing here. However, a compromise is reached between Kentucky and Tennessee in 1820. What they decide is that the boundary between Tennessee and Kentucky will be west of the Tennessee River. It will be on the 3630, which is this line here. East of the Tennessee River, it will be on the Walker line. And this decision is what gives rise to this exclave, or what I like to call the Kentucky bubble. And so, folks, there you have the dividing line between Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Its histories, its anomalies, and its controversies. I want to thank you all for your attention. I lost track of time, so I don't know where I am with the time. We have time for questions? When am I supposed to be done?
350.
Oh, so I've got 2 minutes. Actually, I told you everything I know, so there's no point. I can't see because it's dark in here.
Does anybody live in
This is the first time today you could actually see the slides. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know who was smart enough to figure out how to do the lights, but whoever it was. It was you. Oh, thank you. Good lady. Thank you so much. Okay, any questions? None? Oh, yes.
Does anybody live in the Kentucky bubble?
Oh, so glad you asked that, because yours truly could not resist going there. Well, first of all, that is really a loop of the Mississippi River. It's an oxbow, or whatever the heck you want to call it, okay? And because it gets flooded so often, the land is really yucky. I mean, it's just, it's like gumbo, you know what I mean? So I go, and there is a road, there is a farm. Doesn't look like it's too prosperous, but I think, you know, again, there are people who live sort of out of the mainstream, and you got to be careful that you don't. You know, I didn't see any no trespassing signs, but I was ginger about going in there. You know? But yes, there is a farm and I guess a family that lives there. But yeah, that's how you can. Kind of cool. Anything else? Somebody else had a question.
Did you say they kept surveying it to the Pacific Ocean or not? Does it just end there, 3630?
Oh, no, that line, that's the Missouri Compromise line. I mean, that line gets used again and again going across the country.
Yeah.
You know, it divides, like I was saying at the very beginning, it's used a lot, but I only wanted to show you that portion from the Atlantic Ocean to the, but yeah, it's what goes between. Well, if you ever look at Missouri, there's a little piece of Missouri that hangs down, it's called the Boot Heel. And again, that was because this very wealthy, very influential farmer says, well, excuse me, but my land has always been in Missouri, not in Arkansas. And so they make, you know, I mean, they're not supposed to do that. But let me tell you one thing, though. They finally took this issue of the dividing line between Tennessee and Kentucky, they took it to the Supreme Court. And that was like in 1893. And the Supreme Court, because this is kind of a rule that we have with surveying, even if it's not right, if it's been accepted and utilized and land grants have been issued accordingly, and that goes on for a while, then it's like a done deal. And that's what the Supreme Court said. You know, too little, too late. You should have said something way back then. You know, it's 1893, too bad. You got what you got, you know, so.
I just wanted to share something. The surveyors of the Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee line, they're still fighting.
Yes,
all
they
these
are.
years later.
Yeah, because Georgia wants more of the Tennessee River. That's why.
For
Yeah,
water.
yeah, they say, oh, well, it wasn't done right.
Well, just as a kind of side note to that, Tennessee got the last laugh because the Tennessee Valley Authority took over that whole section of the land between the lake, well, it used to be the land between the rivers.
Yeah.
They dammed it up and made it lake, so Tennessee kind of occupies that part of Kentucky anyway.
Well, yeah, yeah.
So.
Yeah. But the thing is that I'll tell you the truth, I don't need to badmouth him, but Christopher Greenup was so wishy-washy. If he would have just put his, and he wrote a couple of letters, you know, they're sort of like this. He's writing to Blunt, who is the, William Blunt, who is the governor of Tennessee, saying, you know, dear sir, blah, 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 I really think, you know, we should do this and do that. You know, Blunt writes back to him, don't bother me, I'm putting in roads. I got time for this. You know, so I think he was easily intimidated, and so he didn't, anyhow, so we're done. So thanks a lot, folks.
What is it? Over here.
Thank you. Oh, you're next. Oh, yeah, you have your little hoozy doozy, huh? Okay. Okay. All right. Yes, I move everything around. No, I don't. I can do what I want to do. Put that in there. So now what we're going to do is it's blinking, it says grading used, and we're going to go
Decisions. I'm starting to be nap time. There's that too. I'll see you back there.
That's you, right? So what we're going to do is
Yeah, I'll see you at the coach. I just think put all that in.
Okay, so now we're going to do this, and the good news is, whoop, I should really do this to make sure it comes out of there without screwing it up. Eject. Okay, now so see, it says save. There's that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to double click this baby. And we're going to go up here to where it says view slide.
Thank you.
Were you looking for these?
There you are. So now the thing is,
No, it's okay.
okay, but
Sure.
shoot, I have to do stop. Wait, I didn't do stop on this. Stop.